It was just past 8:30 p.m. when Emma heard the first knock. She had been curled up on the couch with a mug of tea, the apartment quiet except for the soft hum of the heater. Living alone for the past 3 years had become routine, but something about that knock felt different. The sound was gentle, deliberate, almost hesitant. Emma paused, listening. She lived on the 4th floor, and most visitors were delivery people. But this didn't sound like a package drop. It was slower, softer, almost thoughtful. Curiosity pried her from the comfort of the couch. She stood and moved toward the door, pulling the chain lock back. Standing there was her neighbor, Daniel, from across the hall. He was in his mid-30s, always polite but reserved. He looked a little awkward, hands tucked into the pockets of his jacket, and there was a strange softness in his eyes tonight. "Hey," he said quietly. I just wanted to check if you were okay. I heard some noise earlier and—" He trailed off, unsure of how to finish the sentence. Emma blinked. Noise? She hadn't heard anything unusual, but the concern in his voice was hard to ignore. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "Just reading." He nodded slowly, but didn't leave. There was a pause, an awkward silence that felt heavier than it should. Then he said, almost to himself, "It's been a long week." Emma felt a flicker of sympathy. She knew the life of someone living alone could be isolating. "I understand," she replied softly. "It's been tough for a lot of us lately." Daniel looked at her, really looked, for the first time. There was no rush, no pretense, just a quiet attentiveness that made her chest tighten in a way she hadn't felt in years. He shifted slightly, glancing down at the floor before back up at her. "Would you want to talk for a bit? Just company, I guess." Emma hesitated. She rarely had visitors in the evening, especially unplanned ones, but something in his calm, careful demeanor made her feel safe. She nodded, stepping aside. "Sure, come in." He smiled faintly, and there was a kind of relief in the way he moved past the threshold. The apartment felt warmer suddenly, as if his presence carried a subtle comfort. They settled in the living room, and the first awkward moments passed with small talk about the building, the weather, nothing that touched too closely on personal life. Yet, with every passing minute, the conversation deepened without words. There was an unspoken understanding, a quiet connection that needed no explanation. Daniel's gentle nature contrasted with Emma's habitual caution, and she found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't imagined. As the clock ticked closer to 9:15, she noticed how the dim light from the floor lamp seemed to highlight the worry lines at the corners of his eyes. "You carry a lot," she said softly. He shrugged, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. "I suppose we all do." They sat in silence for a few moments, and Emma felt something shift. It wasn't just the comfort of another person. It was the feeling that, somehow, their meeting tonight was meant to be. She didn't know why. She didn't question it. She just let the quiet fill the space between them. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. The night wore on, and the apartment felt smaller, cozier, wrapped around them like a soft blanket. Then, without warning, Daniel's expression changed. His gentle smile faltered, replaced by a look Emma couldn't read. He glanced toward the hallway, as if listening for something she couldn't hear. "Did you hear that?" he asked, almost too quietly for her to catch. Emma shook her head, heart beating faster. "Hear what?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just stared, his eyes reflecting a worry she hadn't seen before. There was a moment where the calm, quiet evening felt as if it had been broken, and Emma realized that whatever was coming next, it would change the night completely. Emma's pulse quickened. Daniel's sudden tension was unsettling, but she trusted him enough to follow his lead. "It's nothing," he said finally, though the tightness in his jaw suggested otherwise. "Probably just my imagination." He moved closer to the window, peering out into the dimly lit parking lot below. The street lamps cast long shadows across the asphalt. "I live alone, too," he continued softly, "so sometimes I notice things more. Or maybe I notice them too late." Emma nodded, trying to match his calm, but the uneasy feeling in her stomach wouldn't subside. She glanced at the clock, 9:24 p.m., and realized the night felt different somehow, heavier, charged with a strange expectation. Daniel finally turned back to her, his eyes softer now, but there was still that edge of worry. "I didn't mean to come in like this," he admitted. "I just didn't want to be alone tonight." Emma's heart softened. She understood that feeling all too well. Being alone could feel like a quiet weight pressing down, especially on nights when the world outside seemed colder than usual. She offered him a smile. "You're not alone now," she said. I'm glad you came." The air between them seemed to shift. Words became less important. They both understood that connection didn't always need explanation. The small sound of the heater, the soft ticking of the clock, and the quiet hum of the city outside filled the apartment with a serene rhythm. After a few moments, Daniel spoke again, his voice lower this time. "I've been wanting to say this for a while. You're different, Emma. Not in a loud, noticeable way, but in a way that matters." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had always considered herself ordinary, someone who blended into the background. Hearing that from him, so calmly, so sincerely, made something inside her shift. She wasn't used to someone seeing her like that. I don't know what to say," she admitted. Her words were small, hesitant, but honest. "Then don't," Daniel replied gently. "Just let it be." The moment stretched, quiet and full, a delicate pause in the middle of an ordinary night that felt anything but ordinary. Emma realized she hadn't laughed or even spoken so freely in a long time. And now, sitting across from Daniel, she felt that part of herself waking up again. Then, abruptly, there was a faint sound outside the apartment door. Not a knock this time. Something softer, almost a scuffle. Daniel tensed immediately, standing up, moving toward the door with careful steps. Emma froze. "Daniel, what is it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pressed his ear to the door, listening intently. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was moving just outside. His body stiffened, the gentleness from before replaced by a cautious alertness. Emma felt a surge of fear she hadn't expected. Alone, she might have panicked. But with Daniel nearby, his quiet confidence radiating through the room, she felt steadier. Her hand found his arm without thinking, and he looked down at her, surprised but not displeased. "It's probably nothing," he said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "Still, stay close." They moved back to the couch, but neither could ignore the tension that had settled in the room. Daniel glanced at her, his eyes searching for reassurance, and Emma offered a small, reassuring nod. It wasn't bravery, not really. It was trust. Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. The soft scuffling stopped, leaving only silence. But the unease remained, hovering like a shadow over the room. Emma realized that this night, quiet and ordinary just moments ago, was no longer predictable. And while Daniel's presence brought comfort, it also raised questions she couldn't yet answer. What was happening outside? Why did his sudden worry feel so personal, almost protective in a way she hadn't expected? The clock ticked toward 9:55 p.m., and Emma noticed that the soft light from the lamp reflected off Daniel's face, highlighting the faint worry lines he tried so hard to hide. She couldn't help but wonder what he was thinking, what memories or fears had crept into this quiet night. And then, without warning, the door handle moved slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if someone, or something, was testing it. Emma's stomach tightened as the door handle jiggled again. Daniel's hand moved instinctively to cover hers. "Stay calm," he whispered, his voice steady but firm. "I've got you." The apartment felt smaller now, the quiet almost suffocating. Emma's heart pounded, each tick of the clock echoing in her ears. She wanted to ask who it could be, but the words wouldn't come. Daniel's calm presence was the only anchor she had. He stepped closer to the door, careful, deliberate. "Hello?" he called softly. No answer, just the faint creak of the hallway floor outside. Emma could hear a soft rustle, like someone shifting their weight. She held her breath, wishing it was just a neighbor returning home late. Daniel glanced at her, reading her fear in her eyes. "It's probably just a stray cat or someone misplacing their keys," he said, though she could tell he wasn't convinced. There was a tension in his jaw that told her he was preparing for anything. Emma nodded, gripping the edge of the couch. She hadn't realized how quickly a peaceful evening could turn into this, an unsettling mix of curiosity, fear, and adrenaline. Yet, despite it, she felt a strange sense of safety. Daniel's presence wasn't just comforting, it felt protective, almost like he had been waiting for a moment exactly like this. The handle moved one last time, then stopped. Silence settled back in the apartment, but it was heavy now, almost palpable. Emma's thoughts raced. Who could it be? Why knock so gently and then pause like that? Daniel finally turned, his expression unreadable. "I'll check the hallway," he said, his voice calm, almost rehearsed. "Stay here." Emma hesitated, but she trusted him. "Okay," she whispered. Minutes passed. She heard his footsteps in the hallway, light and careful. Then a muffled voice, distant but clear enough to make her flinch. "Daniel, it's me." Relief flooded her, followed by confusion. "Who?" she murmured, leaning forward. Daniel returned moments later, a faint smile on his face, but his eyes still guarded. "False alarm," he said softly. "Just a neighbor coming home late. Nothing to worry about." Emma let out a shaky laugh, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I thought," she started, then shook her head. "I thought something was wrong." Daniel's hand brushed hers again. "I know," he said quietly. "It's easy to think the worst when you're alone." The apartment seemed to relax slightly, the tension easing like a tide retreating. They returned to the couch, this time sitting closer than before, the earlier awkwardness replaced by a shared understanding. Emma felt a flutter she hadn't felt in years, a mix of gratitude, curiosity, and something warmer she couldn't name. "I didn't expect tonight to turn out like this," Emma admitted. "I thought it would just be quiet." Daniel chuckled softly. "Life doesn't usually give us quiet moments, not really, but sometimes the interruptions are the parts we remember." Emma smiled, feeling a lightness settle over her chest. The fear had passed, but the night was far from ordinary now. She noticed the way Daniel's eyes caught the light from the lamp, the subtle shift in his expression whenever he glanced at her. Something about him felt gentle yet firm, like a grounding presence she didn't want to lose. They spoke in whispers after that, sharing small stories about their lives, childhood memories, favorite books, tiny daily routines. It was intimate, but not in a way that made Emma uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like they were slowly peeling back layers, learning who each other was in real time. Hours passed unnoticed. The clock struck 10:57 p.m., and Emma realized she hadn't felt this connected to anyone in years. Daniel's presence had turned an ordinary evening into something quiet yet remarkable. Then, just as she was beginning to relax completely, a soft thud came from the kitchen. Emma froze. Daniel's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt impossibly silent again, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Emma's heart jumped at the sound from the kitchen. She could feel Daniel tense beside her, every muscle alert. "Probably just something falling," he murmured, though his eyes scanned the room with quiet caution. Emma nodded, but she didn't move. She trusted him, yet a shiver ran down her spine. The apartment felt different now, less like a safe haven and more like a space waiting for a story to unfold. Daniel stood, moving toward the kitchen with careful, measured steps. Emma followed, staying just behind him. Her pulse raced with every soft creak of the floorboards. She wanted to tell herself it was nothing, but deep down, she knew the night had more in store. When they reached the kitchen, Emma noticed a small stack of papers on the counter had shifted slightly. Nothing else seemed out of place. Daniel picked up the top sheet and examined it, his brow furrowed. "Looks like it just fell," he said, placing it back neatly. Emma exhaled, a mix of relief and lingering tension coursing through her. I don't know, someone was here," she admitted, her voice small. Daniel turned to her, his eyes softening. "I know," he said. "Moments like this make your imagination run wild. It's natural." For a while, they stayed in the kitchen, the quiet only broken by the hum of the refrigerator. Emma leaned against the counter, watching Daniel move with careful precision, every action calm yet deliberate. She felt a strange comfort in his steady presence. They returned to the living room, settling back onto the couch. The night felt heavier now, but in a way that made Emma feel alive, more aware of each heartbeat, each subtle sound. Daniel's presence beside her was grounding, a reminder that even in uncertainty, someone could make it feel manageable. "You have a way of making this all seem easier," Emma said softly, her gaze lingering on him. Daniel smiled faintly, a quiet warmth in his eyes. "I just try to be present. That's all anyone can do, really." Emma felt a lump in her throat. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed simple human connection, the kind that didn't rush or demand, that simply existed alongside you. I'm glad you knocked tonight," she whispered. Daniel looked at her, really looked, and for a moment, the playful warmth faded into something deeper. "So am I," he admitted. The words were soft, but carried weight, the kind that lingered in the air long after they were spoken. Time seemed to stretch. They didn't need to speak to feel the closeness growing between them. The night had shifted from uneasy to intimate, but in a clean, gentle way that made Emma's chest feel full, almost tender. Suddenly, there was another faint sound, this time from the hallway outside her apartment. Not a knock, not a scuffle, just the soft, deliberate echo of footsteps. Emma froze, her hand instinctively gripping Daniel's arm. He leaned closer, whispering, "Stay calm, I'll check." The minutes dragged, each second thick with anticipation. Emma felt a strange blend of fear and curiosity. The world outside the walls of her apartment suddenly seemed larger, more unpredictable. She realized that the night had shifted entirely. What started as a simple visit had grown into something charged with unspoken emotion and unanticipated suspense. Daniel returned slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, but his eyes still sharp. "Just someone passing by," he said, shrugging lightly. "Nothing to worry about." Emma exhaled, though her chest still felt tight. The night had tested her calm, but through it all, Daniel had been steady. She realized she trusted him in ways she hadn't expected, a feeling both thrilling and disarming. As the clock ticked toward 11:59 p.m., Emma found herself wondering about the moments yet to come. What had started as an ordinary evening now felt like a turning point, a night where quiet gestures and gentle words carried weight she hadn't known they could. And just as she settled back, ready to relax again, Daniel's phone buzzed softly. He glanced at it, his expression unreadable for the first time that night. Emma noticed the subtle tension returning, a quiet reminder that the night wasn't done with them yet. Daniel's eyes lingered on his phone for a moment longer than usual. He didn't speak immediately, but Emma could feel the subtle shift in his energy, a quiet seriousness replacing the warmth that had settled over them. "I need to take this call," he said softly, keeping his voice low. "It shouldn't take long." Emma nodded, though her curiosity flared. She stayed seated, watching as he stepped toward the hallway, phone pressed to his ear. The dim light from the living room lamp fell across his profile, highlighting the faint worry lines she had noticed earlier. A moment passed. Then another. Emma realized she could hear the soft cadence of his voice, calm yet deliberate, like he was carefully choosing each word. There was something in the way he spoke, an ease that contrasted with the tension she felt, that made her heart ache in a quiet, unfamiliar way. When he returned to the couch, the corners of his mouth carried a faint smile, but his eyes were thoughtful, reflective. He sat down beside her, their shoulders brushing lightly. Emma felt that flutter again, that warmth that had been building since he first knocked on her door. "It's all fine," he said finally. "Just a small emergency I had to handle. Nothing serious." "I was worried," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's gaze softened. "I know, and I appreciate that you cared." For a long moment, they simply sat together, letting the quiet night fill the space between them. Emma realized that in the span of a few hours, her apartment, once silent and predictable, had transformed into something extraordinary. The presence of another person, gentle and patient, had turned the ordinary into an evening she wouldn't soon forget. She thought about the way he had instinctively protected her earlier, the calm confidence that had steadied her when fear crept in. She thought about his soft voice, the careful attention he gave to her words, and the unexpected way her heart had leaned toward him. "I never expected tonight to feel like this," she said softly, almost to herself. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable for a heartbeat, then softened into a gentle smile. "Life is full of surprises," he said. "Some small, some significant. Tonight felt like one of the significant ones." Emma's chest tightened. She didn't need to ask what he meant. Somehow, they both knew. The night had created a connection, quiet, gentle, but impossible to ignore. The clock approached 12:30 a.m., and the city outside had quieted almost completely. Streetlights flickered over empty sidewalks, and the soft hum of distant traffic filled the silence of the apartment. Emma realized that for the first time in a long while, she felt fully present, not alone, not anxious, just aware and alive in a moment she didn't want to end. Daniel shifted slightly, his hand brushing hers. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, a silent acknowledgement of the bond that had grown over the night. It was gentle, not rushed, but it carried weight, the kind of weight that lingers long after the moment passes. They spoke quietly then, sharing small hopes and memories, stories that had been tucked away in their hearts. Emma found herself laughing softly, the sound light and unguarded. Daniel matched her laughter, and for the first time in years, the apartment felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with outside noise or city lights. It was alive with connection, trust, and an unspoken understanding. Hours slipped by. The fear from earlier had vanished, replaced by a tender closeness that neither of them had expected. Emma realized that a simple knock at her door had led to a night filled with unexpected warmth, gentle vulnerability, and the quiet thrill of new connection. Finally, Daniel stood, moving toward the door. "I should get going," he said softly, though there was reluctance in his tone. Emma rose with him. "Thank you. For tonight. For everything," she whispered. He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "No, thank you, Emma, for letting me in, for trusting me." The door closed behind him, leaving Emma alone once again. But the apartment no longer felt empty. The night had changed something between them, something quiet yet unforgettable. She sank back onto the couch, heart still warm, and realized that some nights, the simplest gestures, like a knock at the door, could leave the deepest mark. Emma smiled softly to herself, thinking of Daniel and the gentle, unspoken promise that lingered in the air. The night had started ordinary, but it had ended with something remarkable, a quiet connection she knew she would carry with her forever. The soft hum of the city outside mingled with the quiet in her apartment, and for the first time in years, Emma felt truly seen. The gentle silence Daniel had brought into her life had left an impression she couldn't forget, a memory she would revisit with a smile again and again. The night was over, but the story, the quiet, emotional story, was only beginning.